So I'm going to do this in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about what happens when the agent's utility is not linear in money. The standard assumption, especially in computer science and a mechanism design in, across economics and computer science, is that agents' utility functions are quasi-linear. It's extremely convenient. But I would argue, in fact, when indivisibilities are very important, it's usually because you're selling big chunky stuff. And this big chunky stuff might mean that an assumption of causal linearity is quite unreasonable. In particular, it's unreasonable because it implies that agents have an unlimited capacity to borrow. So you can summarize their preferences by evaluation. Money itself comes in linearly. If you value something at £1 million or euros or yen or whatever, you can just borrow that money to be able to buy it. And of course, in practice, when you're thinking about contexts like an auction, a big auction for spectrum, for example, budget constraints end up mattering. Money comes in non-linearly. As you run out of money, you might start worrying about this. So I'll start with this case, and then I'll move on to a case of pseudo markets, which I'll motivate when I get there. So this is about equilibrium existence beyond transferable utility. And let me start with describing what economists call income effects. And of course, I appreciate that most people, I suspect, on this call are not economists. So I'll try to sort of take you through some of the ways in which economists think about a setting when utility is not linear in money. And it's based on a paper with Ravi and two of my colleagues in Oxford, Elizabeth Baldwin and Paul Klemperer, which came out last year. So let me just sort of remind you about the setup. The top part is really what Ravi has already set up. We have a finite set J of agents, a set I of indivisible goods, exactly the same notation. Xj is going to tell us the set of bundles that are going to be feasible for a particular agent. And now I'm going to more carefully think about the following two things, is endowment of money and consumption of money. And this is going to be sort of much more crucial here. So agents will start out with some amount of money, W0, and they will end up, or in other words, consume the amount of money X0 after they've paid for the goods, maybe that they've bought or sold some of the goods that they had. So I'll start with the same exchange economy that Ravi has already introduced, where agents would start out with some endowment of goods. So now let's just kind of set up this model a little bit more generally. So for now, for each agent, I want to think about a following object, which is the minimum consumption of money. And think about this as a sort of budget constraint, perhaps. So a natural one might be something like 0. You don't want to run out of money. But what I will do in the next assumption that's stated here is that I will rule out the fact that you can hit that budget constraint and actually run out of money completely. So our utility function is now going to be more general. It will take as an input some amount of money and some feasible consumption bundle and spit out a number, just like in Ravi's case. But I'll make the following assumptions about money. First, I will assume that utility is continuous and strictly increasing in money. This is quite natural. More money is better. And then I'll make the following sort of assumption about what happens in the limit. So the first part says that no matter which bundle of indivisible goods I'm consuming, as I'm approaching my minimum level of consumption of money, my utility is going to tank to negative infinity. Okay? So things get really bad when I run out of money. Okay? And on the other hand, when I get an infinite amount of money, I'm going to become infinitely happy. Okay, so it's going to go to something big. Now, these numbers don't literally have to be negative infinity and positive infinity. It's just, I think, easier to think about in this case. You can pick other bounds, and nothing, of course, changes, because what matters is really the ordinal properties rather than the cardinal ones. So this is much more general than the model that Ravi has introduced, in which utility is quasi-linear. So let's just see what it means under these assumptions to have quasi-linear utility. Well, if you have quasi-linear preferences, your minimum level of consumption of money is negative infinity. There isn't really a bound on how much you can consume. And in particular, you can summarize your utility function in the following way, as Ravi showed. It's just the amount of money that you have plus the valuation of the bundle of indivisible goods. Okay, so that's what we've already seen. And Ravi has shown you a way of approaching this analysis for this case. With the setup I've given you, you can do much more general stuff. As I said, you can incorporate what we would call a soft budget constraint. So in particular, a functional form we really like, it turns out to be very beautiful and very pleasing and easy to analyze, is what we call a quasi-logarithmic utility function. This is just the name we've given it. It looks like a bit like a quasi-linear one, but you see here, money comes in non-linear. Here actually takes a log functional form. So your utility is log of money plus some function. We shouldn't really call it a valuation, but it's sort of some function of that captures your the part that's relevant to the indivisible goods. And so here you can see that as the amount of money you have approaches zero, utility goes to negative infinity because it's a log. And as the amount of money becomes positive infinite, very, very slowly, it goes to positive infinity. All right. So you can do many more things. We like this functional form. It allows us to do very nice examples, which we present in the paper. I won't dwell on it too much. So let me sort of show you how you can now approach the analysis in this more general case using standard consumer theory from economics. So the way that economists sort of think about the consumer's problem is that they usually say, remember, the standard case is the convex case. All goods are divisible. And we say, you start out with a bundle of goods, you trade them at competitive prices. What is the amount of utility, which new bundle is going to maximize your utility subject to the budget constraint, which is basically given by the value at competitive prices of your endowment. So here, this is written in a sort of slightly clunky form because we have two parts here, which is the divisible goods and the indivisible goods and money. But what this says is what we call the Marshallian demand, and I'll come back to why that's the case. The Marshallian demand is your primal objective, is to maximize your utility. So to select a bundle of indivisible goods. Now you'll have to pay for those and you'll have some money left at the end. So maximize your utility subject to essentially the constraint, which is the valuation of your endowment. So given prices and given the endowment, what is the most utility you can get from this market? Okay, so this is the natural objective, right? Because usually people come into the market with prices and an endowment, and we ask, what is your utility maximizing set of bundles, right? So this is typically going to be a correspondence. So this is the primal, and what you can do is you can write down the dual of this. Rather than setting up the utility maximization problem, given the endowment, you can set up the dual, which is what economists call Hicksian demand. And this says, given a particular utility level U at competitive prices, what is the least amount of money you need to get to the to this? Which bundle is going to minimize your expenditure necessary to get to this utility level? So one is the utility maximization problem. The dual of it is the expenditure minimization problem for a given utility level. And what we learn, what we teach our students, is that a bundle of goods is expenditure minimizing if and only if it is utility maximizing. And in particular, so there's a duality between these two. And in particular, when the utility function is quasi-linear, these two coincide. The only reason why they differ is because, in our context, is because money can enter non-linearly into the objective. So using Ravi's notation, if preferences are quasi-linear, we don't need to qualify whether we have the primal objective or the dual objective. They're the same. So Marshallian demand and Hicksian demand will coincide. And you can write it exactly as Ravi had done before, just by saying that your demand correspondence is going to capture the bundles that are going to maximize the difference between your valuation and your expenditure, okay? Because that is in fact your utility function in that case, okay? All good, all clear? So what you'd already seen is basically the bottom picture. This is what I've already done, but the more general analysis requires you to think about this duality. And this duality is very important because it captures a duality between two universities in my country, which is Oxford and Cambridge. Marshall was a famous economist in early 20th century, Cambridge, and he developed what we now call Marshallian demand, that primal objective. John Hicks was at Oxford, and he developed that dual approach, that expenditure minimizing approach. And what I want to tell you in the sort of next half an hour or so is that it turns out to be the dual approach which is crucial to thinking about equilibrium existence. It's the Oxford approach that is going to deliver the results, okay? And unfortunately, trying to do it things the Cambridge way is going to be no good. No disrespect, of course, to people in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is really all about Cambridge, England. So here is why. The first thing I want to show you is that you can express Hicksian demand through a quasi-linear objective. Okay, great. There was a question from Adityan that I can see. So again, these are taken as given, Adityan. The question is, how does U and W in the primal dual equality compare? Right. So in both of these objectives, you take them as given. And what you would then say is that from your utility maximization problem, you're going to then achieve a particular utility level, and you plug in that utility level into your expenditure minimization problem, and that's what's going to give you the coincidence. Okay, so you use one in the other. Okay. Fab, thank you. That's a great question. Okay, so now let me just show you why Hicksian demand, this dual objective, is so special and so useful. So we can define the following object, and this is what we do in this paper. We define an object which we call a Hicksian valuation. It is not the same as a valuation that you've seen in Ravi's talk, but it looks a little bit like a valuation, and we'll call it a Hicksian valuation because, as you will see, it's going to be related to Hicksian demand. So what I'm going to define is an object for a given utility level. I will define an object called the Hicksian valuation, which essentially inverts the utility function for some bundle. So what does it really say? It says, with a minus in front of it, so Hicksian valuation is the amount of money that an agent needs to get to a given utility level U when he has access to a consumption bundle of indivisible goods X. So I give you a bundle, I give you an apple and a banana. I tell you, you need to get to a utility level of 70. You tell me, this is how much money I will need to get to it. So it's kind of like a valuation. And the reason why it's kind of like a valuation is because it's a dollar amount, it's a yen amount, it's an amount of money, right? It's a currency. So that's what makes it kind of a useful object. So it has a natural interpretation, and it's a very nice object. But crucially, what you can show just by moving some definitions around, once you have this definition, is that you can rewrite Hicksian demand using the Hicksian valuation, which is very nice. And I can see Alon nodding. It's kind of a natural operation here. Turns out to be very economically useful. So now I'm going to redefine Hicksian demand, the expenditure minimization problem, in the following way. I'm going to say that for a utility level and a price vector, the Hicksian demand is the argmax of this quasi-linear objective, where the non-linear term is actually the Hicksian valuation. Okay? And so you can think of, when an agent is expenditure minimizing, of them really maximizing some quasi-linear objective. So it's not the case that they're actually got quasi-linear preferences. That is not true. So money does enter non-linearly, but we can rewrite it by using the Hicksian valuation as a quasi-linear objective. There is a sense in which an agent is quasi-linear when they are expenditure minimizing. Again, note that the arguments are prices and utility levels, not prices and endowments, right? So this is for a price vector and a utility level. Okay. So that's sort of already interesting. I've told you that Marshallian demand is dual to Hicksian demand, but now Hicksian demand can be rewritten in a way that gives every agent a quasi-linear objective. And as you saw from Ravi's talk, we know a lot about the quasi-linear case. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to exploit our knowledge of the quasi-linear case and this sort of duality from the point of view of the consumer to say something about equilibrium in the case where things are nonlinear. Okay, so in the word of economists, what these Hicksian valuations do, and in general, this is what Hicksian demand does, is capture what we call substitution effects. So let me very quickly sort of summarize how economists think about this. In the case when money enters non-linearly into your utility, and you're thinking about what Ravi called a price effect, what happens when a price of a good changes? Two things occur. The first thing is that holding utility level fixed, there's going to be substitution. So you're going to substitute from one good to the other at a fixed utility level. So even if I compensated you because the price of a good has gone up, and I've given you the money to keep you at the same utility level, now that prices have changed, you're going to switch to some other goods. This is what we call a substitution effect. The second thing that happens is that because prices have changed, this might be really good for you because maybe it's your good that you own whose price has changed, and now you're richer as a result because you can sell it and buy something else. So this is what we call an income effect. In general, when a price changes, both of these effects occur. There is a substitution effect and there is an income effect. What Hicksian demand allows you to do is to isolate the substitution effect. Why? Because it keeps the utility level fixed. So the consumer is on the same utility level. Prices are changing, but as prices change, I'm compensating the consumer to keep them on the same utility level they were on before. So the only thing they now face is different relative prices. And so since this is what Hicksian demand captures, in fact, this is what Hicksian valuations capture, and this is what this lemma really gets at. And in fact, the term that captures the income effects in this case is actually the changes in the utility level, right? So when prices change, two things occur. You can move to a higher or to a lower utility level, and at the same time, for a given utility level, you're now facing different prices. Okay. So these things are very difficult to handle at the same time, it turns out. In the case when we only have quasi-linear preferences, there are no income effects. It's very nice. The only thing we see is substitution effects. But as soon as we have preferences that are non-linear money, income effects are going to come in and ruin the party, as you'll see, going to make things very hard. But I'm going to show you that by using this idea of this Hicksian valuation and this quasi-linear interpretation of Hicksian demand, we can make very fast progress in analyzing the case where there is also income. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this. So remember, I can summarize each agent's preferences by the Hicksian valuation and the corresponding quasi-linear objective. And then what I can do is I can define this artificial Hicksian economy. So what does the Hicksian economy look like? Well, let's think about the standard economy. In a standard economy, I give everyone an endowment. I give them competitive prices, and given their endowment, given their competitive prices, agents tell me what the utility maximizing bundles are. Here I'm going to do something a little bit weirder, because remember, I'm interested in Hicksian demand and the Hicksian valuation. So now I'm going to give every agent a utility level. And I will say, Ilan, I'm giving you a utility level of 7. Given these competitive prices, tell me which bundle is going to minimize your expenditure. Alon, I'm going to give you utility level 75. Danny, I'm going to give you a utility level of 300. You all face the same prices, of course, and tell me which bundles. And now I'm going to think about that economy. Rather than giving an endowment, I'm going to give you utility level. And then I'll tell you to expenditure minimize. As I said, it's equivalent to think about this economy as one in which all agents have quasi-linear preferences. By that result, that says that Hicksian demand can be rewritten with a quasi-linear objective. So actually, even though this economy is a little bit weird, because you get given a utility level rather than an endowment, it's an economy in which everyone has a quasi-linear objective, which is very nice. And in other words, since everyone has a quasi-linear objective, we would call this a transferable utility economy. right? Now, because it's a transferable utility economy, the only thing that we can see in it is the substitution effects, right? It's economy in which every agent is, we can't see income effects in it. And here indeed, for any given utility level, all you're going to see when prices change, as we said, it's Hicksian demand, so it's going to be just the substitution effects, okay? So why is this a helpful construction? It's because what we can do is we can use this duality at a consumer level to reduce problems in which there are income effects, or economies in which there are income effects, to economies when there are no income. And so we'll do it in the following way. I'll give you two examples in this talk. One example is very well understood, but I'll show you the connection and how it's sort of easy really to see the connection once you've understood the Hicksian economy. So let's think about two very simple economies in which an exchange economy, agents want at most one house. And their utility function is a function of having a house, some house, and money. And we're going to about two cases. One case is what's known as the housing market, in which money enters non-linearly. And this model is due to these three papers by Quincy, Gale, and Svensson. And the other one is the case in which money enters linearly, which is, I think, very familiar to people on this call, is what's called the assignment game. Okay, so, I value a house at 300 and I've paid something for it. My utility is just the valuation of the house minus what I get to it, right? So the analysis of the assignment game is, of course, very well understood. Now, what I want to stress first is that we can think about when we think about the housing market, rather than thinking about Marshallian demand in this case, we can think about Hicksian demand, the dual objective in that case. And because of our quasi-linear interpretation of Hicksian demand, we can think about the dual Hicksian economy to the housing market. What is that Hicksian economy? It's the assignment game. It is the version of the housing market where there are no income effects. In other words, it's the version of the housing market where everyone's preferences are actually quasi-linear, and that turns out to be the assignment game. So if you like, the dual economy, the corresponding economy from our perspective of Hicksian demand, is the assignment game. So what I want to do is I want to say something about equilibrium in the housing market by knowing something about equilibrium in the assignment game. So I'm sure most people on this call know that in the assignment game, existence of equilibrium is very well understood. It's also very well understood for the case of the housing market, but the way in which you arrive at a proof is actually very different. But what I want to show you is a general method of doing a mapping of an economy with income effects to an economy without income effects, and by knowing about equilibrium in the economy without income effects, to conclude that there is an equilibrium in the economy with income effects. Okay, that's the plan. Any questions so far? Fab. So I'm just going to slightly change Ravi's definition of a competitive equilibrium. Remember, I am now allowing for the case in which agents might experience income effects. And so I'm doing exactly the same allocation, the same definition as Ravi had, except now I'm going to say that a competitive equilibrium is going to be a vector of prices and a set of bundles that are utility maximizing, such that markets are going to clear. Okay? So it's the same definition as Ravi had, except he didn't have a subscript M for Marshallian, and I do. And in my case, of course, endowments are going to matter, and in Ravi's case, endowments didn't really matter at all, because all that agents care about is their valuation. They don't care about exactly what endowment they come out with. Remember, quasi-linearity implies infinite ability to borrow. It doesn't really matter what your initial endowment is. Okay, so it's a completely standard definition, but crucially note, what we care about usually is what agents Marshallian demand is. We care about the primal, right? But the analysis turns out to be much easier to do when you think about the dual and the Hicksian. Okay, so we want to make sure we can come back to this definition and answer something for this notion. So as I said, with TU, equilibrium does not depend on the endowment allocation. It very much will depend in the case when utility is not transferable, or in other words, preferences are not quasi-linear. So under a very small assumption that autarky is feasible, that is to say that, for example, you start out with an endowment that's already feasible, right? So in that case, you don't have to trade. It's a small caveat. The following result holds, and this is what we call the equilibrium existence duality. And the equilibrium existence duality says the following things: this competitive equilibrium exists in each Hicksian economy for all utility levels, if and only if competitive equilibrium exists in the original economy for all endowment allocations. Why is this result important? The reason why this result is important, one direction of it is important, is especially important, as you will see, is that by knowing something that happens in a Hicksian economy for all utility levels, that is, in an economy that is a transferable utility economy, you can conclude what happens in an economy, in a corresponding economy with income effects, where there might be income effects. Okay, so we'll see what that looks like. Substantively, from an economic perspective, what it says is that the only thing that matters for equilibrium existence is substitution effects. The only thing that matters is Hicksian demand, not Marshallian demand, as far as equilibrium existence is concerned. Why was this not noticed for a while? I think it's because we focused on the case of quasi-linear preferences where these two things coincide. So you couldn't actually see that there could be a difference. But sort of to an economist, I think an interesting takeaway is that income effects on their own do not determine whether or not equilibrium exists. They can affect what allocation you end up with. They might affect exactly what the prices are going to be and how agents feel about it, but not the question of existence. Okay. So let's apply this result, and this is going to be a picture I will show you one more time. Remember, we've already done the lower block, which is that we said that we can take a housing market in which agents have income effects. We can reinterpret Hicksian demand in a quasi-linear way and construct a corresponding Hicksian economy that is isomorphic to an assignment game. Koopmans and Beckman, using a nice linear programming argument, told us that equilibrium exists in this economy. And by using, so we're now in the top left corner of this diagram. And by using the equilibrium existence duality, we can actually conclude that an equilibrium will exist in the housing market as well. What's interesting is that if you were to approach this result cold, you can't prove existence, it seems, by say, a linear programming argument. It requires a kind of topological fixed point argument to give existence in the case of the housing market. We haven't somehow broken that barrier. The equilibrium existence duality itself requires a topological fixed point argument. So the step you see at the top, even though it's a very nice result, underneath there is also a fixed point, a problem that one needs to solve for the proof. Okay. So I cannot tell you, for example, whether or not the complexity of one problem is related to the complexity of computing prices in another problem. Okay, and so these are in fact that doesn't follow. So it's all I want to focus on is existence. So these problems are very well understood. So let me show you some new results that we've managed to get from this. And I'm going to return to the example that Ravi already gave you, which is the example of substitutes. Substitutes are, of course, very important and very well studied. And as Ravi pointed out, critical in some sense, in many ways, to how we think about equilibrium. So here is a definition Ravi already showed you. Again, remember, with a small caveat. Ravi was talking about goods being substitutes. He was in a quasi-linear case, so he did not need to add this qualifier of gross. So economists qualify differences, kind of these conditions on demand, depending on whether they're on Marshallian demand, on the primal objective, or they're on Hicksian demand, the dual objective. If you impose a condition on the primal objective, on Marshallian demand, you add the qualifier gross. In Ravi's case, there was no difference, there was no qualifier. And in fact, if I were to encourage you to do one thing, and you are actually writing a paper that has a quasi-linear objective, please also drop the qualified gross, because it is redundant. It adds nothing, even though it's quite pervasive, annoyingly. So here the qualifier, as you will see, is not redundant because I'm actually imposing this condition on my Shellian demand. But other than that, it is the same condition that Ravi has, say, for a qualifier, that it's for all endowments. So what does it say? That goods are gross substitutes if at all endowments, whenever a lower price of one good, that only weakly lowers the Marshallian demand for another good. And one might ask whether or not outside of the quasi-linear setting, gross substitutability implies equilibrium existence. And the answer is yes. So you can show, as we did in a paper with Ravi and Zhuzhi Yang and Tomasz Fleiner, that even if you don't have quasi-linear preferences, gross substitutes are sufficient for equilibrium existence. Again, as I said before, quasi-linearity means that gross substitutes is equivalent to saying substitute valuation. So I'd encourage everyone on this call to call substitute valuation substitutes valuations. I should say substitutes valuation is probably a bit better. So, but what it turns out to be the case, and we pointed this out in the paper, that gross substitutes, when income effects are present, is an extremely restrictive condition. Extremely restrictive condition. And absolutely not necessary for equilibrium existence. Here's a much better condition using the machinery that I've shown you before, is to talk about net substitutes. So whenever economists impose a condition on Hicksian demand, on the dual objective, they add the qualifier net or compensated. Why? Because when prices change, you're being compensated for the losses that you might have incurred when prices have changed. So we would say that goods are net substitutes if at all utility levels decreasing the price of one good only weakly lowers Hicksian demand for another good. And now let's do the exercise we've already done, which is that if agent has preferences that satisfy net substitutes, if we strip out the fact that their utility might be nonlinear in money, it will tell us that this is equivalent to thinking about an economy in which all agents have these substitutes valuations. And of course, as Ravi showed you, Kelso and Crawford in the pioneering paper, they showed that if agents' valuation satisfies substitutes, a competitive equilibrium exists. And the equilibrium existence duality, now going from the top left corner to the top right corner, allows us to conclude that in an economy with income effects in which all agents' preferences satisfy net substitutes, equilibrium will exist for endowment allocations. And this is sort of a new result using this machinery. So again, what is sort of critical from an existence point of view is the fact that existence occurs for substitute valuations. If you add income effects and assume net substitutability, then you maintain the existence property. You might ask, and I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. Wonderful, yes. So what is the intuition? Alon is asking, what is the intuition for what net substitute means? So again, what we're thinking about is what happens following a price change in one good when an agent remains on the same utility level. So a price of a good has gone up and now it's more expensive, so that's bad for you. So I need to give you some money to make sure you can stay on the same utility level. And then I ask, how has your demand for other goods changed? It could go up, it could go down, depending on whether there are substitutes or complements. But that's the intellectual exercise. When you think about gross substitutes, you just ask, got some endowment, price has changed, add that endowment, has your demand for other goods gone up or down? The important thing, of course, is that conditions on Marshallian demand are observable directly. What you observe is prices and endowments. These conditions are not necessarily observable because the argument is a utility level, right? So you have to sort of know, you need to have some reason why they might be satisfied, right? So you can't check them directly, although I would stress, these net conditions, at least in economics, are very common in areas like public finance. They're pretty standard. This is not something that is, after all of these things I'm showing are in some sense textbook concepts. Was that okay along? So was that clear? So let me just give you, to reassure you that this is a more general result, the following proposition is true, is that if a utility function is gross substitutable then it is net substitutable. So net substitutability is more general than gross substitutability. And it's easiest to see it in that housing market example. So let me just walk you through why net substitutability is more general, and you will see it hopefully very easily. So let's kind of think about the converse and why it's not true that gross substitutability implies net substitutability. So I'm going to claim that in the housing market example, an agent satisfies net substitutability, but not gross substitutability. It's very easy to see why they satisfy net substitutability. They want one house. So if a price of a house goes up and you're going to compensate me for the fact that, you know, I've lost out, I'm going to want to go and get another house, right? The other houses are going to become more desirable. But I'm going to claim that it is not true that in this very simple economy in which agents want at most one good, gross substitutes are satisfied. So let's think about our agent, Martine, from Martine Quincy. She owns a red house, a heart house, okay? And she's thinking about selling her house and then buying either a luxurious diamond house, the green house, or a Spartan blue spade house, okay? So now, how might she want to buy the luxurious house? Well, it must be the case that, like, let's kind of imagine that her utility is nonlinear, so she sort of cares about how much money she's got left over, right? And after selling her house, remember, she has to sell her house to buy another house. So it's possible that if the price of Martine's house, her own house, goes up, she stops demanding the Spartan blue spade house, the bad house. Why? Because she now demands the nice house, because she's got her own endowment is better. So now here, note, the price of a good has gone up, and rather than switching to another good, instead Martine actually stops demanding the Spartan house. Okay. So in this case, her preferences do not satisfy gross substitutes because she stops demanding the bad house when the price of her own house goes up. And sort of, if you want, kind of the intuition we like about this is that gross substitutability as a condition is, remember, a condition on the Marshallian demand on the primal objective, which simultaneously captures substitution and income effect. So it constrains both at the same time. Whereas what net substitutability does is that it doesn't constrain income effect, because the Hicksian demand doesn't tell you anything about income effect. So it don't constrain substitution effects. So it constrains less stuff, which is why it's more general. That's the main logic behind this. Okay. So I think I am exactly on time, as I was hoping to be so far, but I would love if people have questions about any of this. Otherwise, I can move to the next part. Especially unfair on Ravi, who is sitting through a session that's twice as long as his own. Okay, fab. So if there are no more questions, maybe we take a little arm stretch, and I will talk for the next sort of 40 minutes about, again, using some of the insights from transferable utility economies to say something about completely different economies, about pseudo markets. Daniel, for example, studied on this call. A lot of the machinery that you will see, or a lot of the results might kind of resemble the ones you've seen. There'll be duality style results, but they will connect economies that now will suddenly look much more different. But as you will see, some of the conditions that Ravi already showed you are going to make a reappearance. And so hopefully it will sort of allow us to connect all of these different parts all these different economies together. Whenever you tell me to go along.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So,
or do people want some break? I'm not sure. Anybody want some short break? I'm good to go, but
how about a pseudo break? Lame joke.
people are
Okay, I think
okay.
we're good.
All right, no loud objections, but okay. So I'll keep going. So this is sort of, if you like, the fourth part of this tutorial, and it's about equilibrium existence in pseudo markets, as Ravi called them, markets with fake money. So what we want to think about, so what we thought about so far is we started out by thinking about an economy in which agents have quasi-linear preferences, they care about money, but in addition, they have an unlimited capacity to borrow. We then thought about an economy in which agents care about money, but they have a limited capacity to borrow. Borrowing becomes very expensive. And what I showed you, and hopefully it was convincing, that equilibrium existence in transferable utility economies fundamentally determines whether or not equilibrium exists in economies with income effects, which are actually very hard to analyze in general. And so this tool of the equilibrium existence duality allows you to check whether an equilibrium might exist by thinking about the Hicksian economy, the transferable utility analog of the economy without transferable utility. So now I want to show you a sort of a similar trick, but applied in a much less obvious context where the economies look much more different, because these economies, the economies I want to focus on, are what are called pseudo markets. So what I'm going to maintain is that there's going to be indivisible goods, but agents are not going to be interested in money at all. We will use money in order to allocate the goods, but what we will do is that we will give agents lotteries over bundles, because we can't use the price mechanism to sort of, if you like, push people out of the market if there's excess demand, for example. So I think I want to sort of start by way of examples. I'm going to think a very simple case. It's going to involve apples and bananas, eventually involve coconuts, like Ravi's case as well, but it will allow us to sort of see the differences and the similarities between two things. I'll start very general, sort of very simple example without any definitions, just to walk you through kind of the logic of how this works. And I should say this is based on a forthcoming but very much completed paper with Teytelboyn from Purdue. So we're going to have two agents, three goods. Okay, two agents. Two agents is going to be enough. And there's going to be an endowment of one of each. Let me just emphasize early on, I'm not going to think about exchange economies anymore. I'm going to think about an assignment setting. So think about a planner allocating goods to agents. So we're trying to allocate courses to business school students, and we are supplying those courses. We are thinking about allocating maybe school seats potentially, or something like this. We're in a world in which we cannot use money, or it's unethical to do so. So there's going to be one apple, one banana, and one coconut. And first, let's think about the transferable utility version of this model, okay, which you're very familiar with from Ravi's lecture, and I emphasized it as well. So the two agents are going to want a bundle of goods each, okay? They're smoothie makers, in Ravi's words. So agent one wants the apple and the banana together, but not separately, and they value them at 0.9. And agent two wants the apple and the coconut together, and they value them at 0.93, okay? And let's not worry about whether or not it's coconut water or not. They don't want the individual goods, okay? They value them at 0 otherwise. So they're very much complements, the apple and the banana to agent one, and the apple and the coconut to agent two, okay? To sort of set things up in a deliberately nice way to think very easily how to compute a competitive equilibrium in this case, okay? So we can very much follow Ravi's nice logic of this. Does anybody want to volunteer to tell me what is the competitive equilibrium allocation going to look like? Got two agents, so hopefully, and they really want both goods. So that's the clue. Alon is going to vigorously type
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Okay.
Whoever goes first gets a huge bonus. Anybody at all? So, I mean, the first question is, do we want to give the apple and the banana to agent 1 or the apple and the coconut to agent 2, right? We're in a transferable utility setting, right? So what we care about is maximizing the valuations or the sum of the valuations. Here, you don't even need to worry about the sum. So we know we need to give the apple and the coconut to agent 2 because that gives us more surplus, right? Beautiful, Alon, exactly right answer. So it's the efficient outcome. And what I claim is that actually, in this case, you can support this by competitive equilibrium prices. So the question is, what are these competitive equilibrium prices? So you can like stare at this a little bit and say, well, they both want the apple, right? So the apple needs to be expensive. And agent 1 doesn't want the coconut. So coconut can basically be free. And so the coconut can cost nothing. And you just need to like price out the other agent from the apple, right? And I've created a nice wedge so that you can stick in a price such that one agent can do and the other one does not. Here you can even price the coconut if you wish in this case. So here are the two prices. This is perfectly fine. There's other prices, of course, but here's some prices for which this will work. So the agent is going to get the apple and the coconut. And the price of apple needs to be sufficiently high. So there is a competitive equilibrium in this case, but no, both agents regard these two bundles of good as complements. Now let's think about how a pseudo market works. And I just want to first, before I give you the definition, give you the intuition. Okay, so if you haven't seen this from before. Now I'm not allowed to use money. So I'm going to give agents some tokens. And for a moment, let's imagine I give them the same amount of tokens, a unit 1 of tokens or 100 monopoly money tokens. And what I want to think about is there going to be a lottery that I can give to each agent such that they want to buy this lottery at the right prices and markets are going to clear in expectation? Okay, so I'll walk you through all the steps of this. The first thing we want is we need to assign some prices such that at those prices, agents would want to buy certain lotteries. And we want to make sure that when we take the expectations of the lotteries, we're going to clear the market in expectation because they're going to look like lotteries. So these are going to be like the first two ingredients. And then I'll come to the last ingredient after that. So let's imagine we have a pseudo market in which I give each agent a unit of monopoly money each. And I claim that at prices 200, the following allocation is going to be kind of an equilibrium in a certain way, right? So I'll call this later a random equilibrium. So at these prices, agent 1 looks at these prices and he says, okay, well, the apple costs 2. I only have 1. The banana is free. I want the apple and the banana bundle. What does the apple and banana bundle cost me? It's the price of the apple plus the price of the banana, which is 2. But I can't afford the 100% probability of that bundle. The only thing I can afford is a 50% probability of that bundle. So the best possible thing I can do, given these prices, is that I get a 50-50 lottery between getting the bundle, apple and banana, and nothing. 50-50 chance of getting nothing. Okay? It's the best possible thing for this agent. Remember, he only wants the two things together. So he's just thinking, how can I make the likelihood of this as high as possible? That's all he needs to do. It's a pretty simple calculation for this guy. Agent 2 has the same thought process. He looks at the prices. He has a token budget of 1. He wants the both bundle of the goods together. And he can at most afford to get a 50% lottery of this bundle and nothing. Okay? Is everyone okay with this, right? This is the rough intuition. So in particular, agent 1 demands bundle apple and banana with probability half. Agent 2 demands bundle apple coconut with probability half. Note in this process, I haven't used the actual valuations in any way. Whether or not it was 0.9 or 0.93 or 400 million made absolutely no difference. What really mattered was that the apple and banana were demanded together because that's what gave agent any positive utility. So this is going to matter later on, right? It's really the structure of preferences that is going to really play a key role, not the exact valuation. What's going to matter as Ravi pointed out, is going to be the domain, right? Like, what is this domain going to look? So here now, we have two agents that regard goods as complement. So now let's sort of think about market clearing in this case. Okay, well, agent 1 demands half an apple in expectation. Agent 2 demands half an apple in expectation. Together, they demand a full apple. So the market for the apple clears in expectation, and banana and coconut are under-demanded. And in this paper, we'll assume that the price for an under-demanded good is going to be 0. Okay? But this is not enough. I've allocated a lottery to agent 1 alone. I've allocated a lottery agent 2 to Daniel. But in order to realize this as an outcome, I need to have a lottery over allocations of good to agents. I need to say, here is an allocation of all goods to all agents. There's some probability of that. Then I need to have an allocation of all goods to another. There's some probability of that. And to make sure that I do a lottery over actual allocations. It's not enough for me to just give you all independent lotteries because they might all conflict with one another. So I need to come up with a lottery over allocations that's going to mimic what agent want in this equilibrium. So this is what I will later call feasibility. It's also known as realizability. This is the kind of word, implementability, sometimes it's called. So can I turn this lottery from a lottery for each agent into a lottery over allocations? And in this case, the answer is yes. It's really obvious. So in one case, you have an allocation in which agent 1 gets the apple and the banana, and agent 2 gets nothing, and we do that with probability of half. And in the other case, agent 1 gets nothing, and agent 2 gets the apple and the coconut. And this allocation happens with probability of half. Note, under this lottery, agents get exactly what they were demanding in what we will call later random equilibrium, right? They're going to get exactly the same thing, not just they'll get the same lottery. Okay. Good. So the question is, in this paper, when can you do that last step? When can you go from a random equilibrium to being able to realize it? Because it turns out that last step is very often highly non-trivial. So I'll give you what we think is a relatively complete answer to this question for these settings in the next 27 minutes. Okay. And I'll come back to this example. So let me just sort of remind you about the nomenclature, exactly the same as in the first part of my talk, exactly the same by and large as in Ravi's talk. Let me flag the difference again. I'm going to think about an assignment setting. So there'll be a planner that has goods that are going to allocate. Agents are not starting out with goods. This does matter, but we're currently working on a version in which you can have exchange, and feel free to contact me offline about this. Agents are going to be called J, indivisible goods are going to be I, and they'll be available in these quantities W. Just remember, W is not an endowment of the agents, it's the endowment of the planner, and he's giving away these goods for free to the agents. The question is, can we do this in an efficient manner using some lottery-like mechanism? Again, same terminology for deterministic bundles. So things, I'm going to differentiate between things that are deterministic and the things that are lotteries. And anything that's a lottery is going to have a tilde, okay? So you can be sure that if it doesn't have a tilde, it's exactly the same notation as Ravi used and as I used. So bundles are just going to be X, and I will assume, as I did before, that autarky is going to be feasible, okay? You don't have to, you can consume nothing, and that's perfectly fine. An allocation is just going to be, a deterministic allocation is going to be a profile of bundles, one for each agent. And we will say that an allocation is feasible if it does not exceed the capacity of the goods, good by good, right? So if agents in totality demand 2 goods, it cannot be the case that the planner only has one of these goods. And finally, I will have this familiar object from Ravi's talk, which is the valuation. It will take a feasible consumption bundle and it will spit out a number, and I will normalize valuation of an empty bundle to 0. Okay. So that's the setup, hopefully extremely familiar. The only difference is going to be that I'm now going to have to define an economy that's going to be a pseudobud. This is going to be my primitives. I'm going to think about V, the valuation, as being this key primitive object. And if you like, I want to think about an agent how they would behave in a transferable utility economy with that valuation versus in the pseudo market with that valuation. Okay, like imagine it's the same agent. Their preferences are fully captured by V. And now I'm going to think about how they might behave in these two different economies. So that's a kind of, I think it's the simplest way of thinking about it. So the primitive object, what's going to capture the preferences is going to be V, the valuation. Okay, so you've seen this from Ravi. Just to recap one more time. We have bundles of indivisible goods. We have prices, one for each good. Agents are going to spend P.X, the expenditure. The utility in a transferable utility economy is my valuation over indivisible goods minus the payment. The demand correspondence for any competitive price vector is going to tell us which bundles are going to maximize the utility, this quasi-linear utility. And what is a competitive equilibrium? Again, we've defined it twice already, but it never hurts to define competitive equilibrium one more time. So it's an assignment setting. There's a tiny little tweak at the end. It's a vector of prices and a profile of bundles, one for each agent, such that each agent is allocated a utility maximizing bundle, and the allocation is feasible. And in particular, if the price is positive for a good, then we are going to ask that this holds with equality. Okay, so we should really only be pricing goods of which we're going to be running out. Okay, it's kind of like a positive Lagrange multiplier. Okay, so this economy you're very familiar with by now, I hope. Now let me define a corresponding model of a pseudo market, and I'm going to do it in two columns so you can see how closely related they actually are. So in the pseudo market, we are going to be thinking about lotteries over feasible consumption bundles. X tilde denotes a lottery. Remember, capital XJ is a set of consumption bundles. L denotes the set of lotteries over feasible consumption bundles. If a bundle is not feasible, we don't want to place any weight on it. So think about all the lotteries over feasible consumption bundles for an agent, and an agent will be allocated one such lottery, X tilde J. For any of these lotteries, so just to make things very concrete, a lottery could be 50% chance of getting an apple, 50% chance of getting a banana, for example. Any one of these lotteries, we can take an expectation. That's going to be denoted by X bar. So if the lottery says 50% chance you get an apple, 50% chance you get a banana, in expectation, you get half an apple, half a banana. Okay, good. So that's the key object. We're going to have a budget, one for each agent, of token money. These budgets, I will allow them to be different in general. That's actually not going to be a thing that's going to matter at all. And that was kind of also a surprising discovery. Prices are going to be very similar to how they are in the transferable utility case, one for each agent. And payments are going to be done in expectation. So what you're going to pay for is your expected bundle. So if you're buying a lottery, which is a 50% apple, 50% banana, then what you're paying for is half an apple and half a banana. Alon has just asked, the budgets just need to be identical. They do not. So B, subscript J, they can be completely different for all agents. Okay? So when you see the result, you'll see they actually don't matter. Now, you might say it sort of doesn't make that much sense for them not to be identical, because in most settings we think about, we can't use money, so agents should start out with the same endowment. It's kind of for equity reasons, right? But actually, from a sort of question of existence, it actually turns out not to matter, which is quite cool. So what is the expected payoff? So the expected payoff is going to be denoted by V tilde. So it's like the expected V. And the argument is going to be a lottery. So you look at a lottery and you say, what is going to be my expected value of it? Why? So we can think about expected value here. Remember, agents have quasi-linear preferences on the other side. It implies that they're risk neutral. So all they need to think about is the expected payoff that they get, right? So they're not risk averse or risk loving. So how do they do that? They basically say, okay, well, 50% I get an apple, 50% I get a banana. What is my valuation for the apple times the probability of getting the apple? What is my valuation of the banana times the probability of a banana? Aggregate these up. This gives you your expected payoff from the lottery. And your random demand is going to be the following correspondence. It will be the set, so given competitive prices, and now also given the budget, right? So you need to specify what the budget is. It is going to be the set of lotteries that are going to maximize your expected payoff, subject to your payment not exceeding the budget. Remember, you're paying expectation. That cannot exceed the budget. You receive expected payoff also in expectation. So this is how you do your evaluation. Okay. So our agents in our previous example, I give you $1. You want to buy a 50 lottery of getting the apple and banana and nothing. So you say, okay, what is the most I can get? And so that's how they decided on this. So what is now a random equilibrium formally looks very similar to a competitive equilibrium. So given a profile of budgets, it's going to be a vector of prices as before, one for each good, and an assignment of lotteries, one to each agent, X, capital X tilde, right? A lottery to each agent, such that the lottery is in each agent's random demand, right? It's a expected payoff maximizing lottery, and markets clear an expectation. So here I'm only requiring the markets clear an expectation. Okay? So this is very weak, right? It's sort of, what have I done? You've taken an economy that, in Ravi's words, was not convex, and you've convexified it by allowing agents to have lotteries. So you've sort of taken an economy with problems, and you've sort of seemingly got rid of all problems, right? Because now this economy is sort of nice and convex, and in general, that random equilibrium will exist. So sort of kind of like a fairly straightforward argument using Kakutani's fixed point theorem, a random equilibrium exists in every pseudo market. But remember, that's not enough, right? It's not enough for me to just say there exists a lottery, one for each agent, such that markets clear an expectation. It's almost meaningless, because in the end, what I need to do is to make sure that everyone faces the same lottery. Otherwise, it's a sort of a meaningless object. So now let's formally define what it means to realize or implement a lottery, or we'll say it's a feasible random equilibrium. Let's think about a lottery over allocations. Okay, so an allocation is going to specify a bundle for each agent. That's going to be an allocation. And then we're going to have a lottery over these allocations. And in this lottery, what I want to think about is this object chi j, which is going to be this agent's marginal. So there's a lottery over allocations. In each realization of the lottery, the agent is getting some bundle. So I can just pick out this agent and say, what is the lottery you are facing? What is your lottery? And remember, what we want is this marginal in this grand lottery to match the lottery that they want in a random equilibrium. So again, denoting expectations with bars, we're saying a random equilibrium is feasible, realizable, implementable is the kind of words that you will often find in this literature. If there exists such a lottery over allocations, script X tilde, I should say over feasible allocations. So we need to respect all the feasibility constraints, right? Individual agents and aggregate ones. So it's a bunch of constraints, such that the marginal that each agent gets is in the demand correspondence, and the lotteries match in expectation between the one that the agent was hoping to get and the one that the agent has got, right? So kind of two constraints. One, so you don't have to give the exact same lottery. You just need to give another expected payoff maximizing lottery, but they also need to match in expectation, so the market clearing is not violated, right? And the question is, when is this possible to do? And I will show you at the very end that people have come up with a lot of conditions. I first want to show you a unifying result that tells you when you can always do this. And so I will sort of refer sometimes to the pseudo market equilibrium as being a kind of feasible random equilibrium. Okay, so whenever I can do this, implementability or realizability. Any questions about this definition? It's kind of, I know it was a lot. It was much more notation than almost in the rest of the talk, but hopefully I've done this slowly enough that people were able to follow, because now I think I have a perfect amount of time to finish this off. Okay, so here is a little definition. So I'm going to assume, like Ravi did, if you remember, that the domain of valuations is sufficiently rich to be able to state this result. I will show you why you actually need something like this a little bit more explicitly in this case. And what I'm using is a pun not intended, a variation on Ravi's invariance definition. It's a slightly different one. If you're really paying attention, this definition is a little bit different. Remember, Ravi had two conditions for invariance. One is that the domain was closed under addition of positive linear functions. And he also had a second part to his definition. I'm only going to have one assumption, which is that the domain is closed under the addition of linear functions. Okay, so that part is actually stronger, but I don't have the second part. In spirit, it's the same definition. It's just the context here involves lotteries, but you should really think about these definitions as basically being variations on the appropriate invariance conditions. So now here is the result. I hope people are sort of anticipating. We've shown you a bunch of these duality-like results. So now let V be an invariant domain of valuations. The following result is true. Competitive equilibria exists in the transferable utility economy for all valuations in this invariant domain, if and only if every random equilibrium in a pseudo market is feasible for all valuations in the same domain and all budget profiles. So why is this interesting? Well, there are many invariant domains for which we have existence of competitive equilibrium and transferable utility economy. Ravi gave you a wonderful domain, which was the one of a bundle consistent one. What this tells you is that for all of these domains, you can get pseudo equilibrium existence. And this is quite surprising because most of the work has focused on relatively simple settings where you can get this positive result. But here we're sort of extending it in two ways. One is that we're saying anything you can do in the transferable utility case, you can do in a pseudo market. And as a cherry on top, you can also do this for any budget profile, actually. The budget profile are completely irrelevant to the existence problem, which in a sort of nice way sounds a little bit like the result I was giving you before, that income effects don't matter for existence. It's a sort of a version of this idea, but in this different setting. Exactly what the budget constraint is not the important thing. What really matters is the valuations, or from the previous part of the talk, the substitution effects. This is not quite, precisely the same thing, but economically, I think these are basically the same ideas. Like, it's really the valuations or the substitution effects that really matter for existence. So let me just quickly show you an example, and then I'll conclude by kind of connecting this literature, hopefully in a helpful way, so people have access to this literature and find it straightforward to understand. I'm going to take the example I had before. I'm going to add an extra agent. Okay, maybe it's Ravi, agent 3, who is mixing bananas and coconuts for some reason. Okay, everything else is as before. And this example, I'm hoping, is going to be familiar. If you are listening very carefully to Ravi's talk, he had this example, remember, of three like a cycle of complements where each one wanted a different bundle, and they sort of went in a cycle of apple and banana, banana and coconut, and apple and coconut. So it's a version of this example. And remember, Ravi pointed out that in this case, a competitive equilibrium does not always exist in a transferable utility economy. Okay, so I've cooked things up in a slightly sneaky way. In fact, I've constructed valuations such that competitive equilibrium does exist, even though preferences look very similar. Okay, so I've picked a very nice valuation that makes things work. So this agent 3 values the apple and the banana jointly at 2. He has very strong preferences. So in fact, there is a competitive equilibrium. The third agent just prices out the other two agents. You set prices very high for the banana and the coconut. The other two agents don't want to buy anything. And agent 3 gets both goods. Okay. Obviously, the efficient allocation is to give the banana and the coconut to agent 3, and you can support it with with these high prices for the banana and the coconut. It's very intuitive. He, if you like, outbids the other two agents. But now let's think about random equilibrium. And now the problem of the random equilibrium is going to look very similar to the problem that Ravi showed you for another possible valuation profile in the transferable utility case. So let's think about a random equilibrium with budgets of 1, 1, 1, same budget for everybody. I claim that the following is a random equilibrium. Prices are going to be 1, 1, 1. You can actually pick any budget. If they're the same, it will work the same way. So the prices are just going to be equal to whatever budget you pick. In this case, it's just going to be 1, 1, 1. So agent 1 comes into this. He says price is 1 and 1 for the apple and the banana. He has a budget of 1. The best thing he can do for himself is to buy a 50-50 lottery of the apple and the banana and nothing. Agent 2 wants to get the apple and the coconut with 50% probability or nothing. Agent 3 wants the banana and the coconut with a 50% probability or nothing. It is clearly a random equilibrium because market's clear in expectation. Agents want 1 apple in total, 1 banana in total, 1 coconut in total. But it's also very obvious that this allocation cannot possibly be realized. I'm sorry, this allocation of lotteries cannot be realized. This equilibrium cannot be realized as a lottery over actual allocations. There is no way to be able to have a lottery that is going to match what the agents want in this case, right? And the reason is the following. The reason is that what I did is that I picked a very special valuation profile under which a competitive equilibrium exists. But as Ravi showed you, in general, for this kind of for these kinds of preferences, a competitive equilibrium does not exist in general. So he gave you an example in which agents valued the bundles, I think, at 4, 4, and 4, for example. And so in particular, because a competitive equilibrium does not exist for this, is not guaranteed for this invariant domain, you cannot guarantee that you'll be able to realize any random equilibrium. And that's why the invariance part really matters. So in general, there isn't an obvious connection between these two, but as long as you restrict your domain to be sufficiently rich or to be invariant, then you can see this, you can hopefully see this connection. So Alon asked, is there any algorithmic way to find feasible lotteries? It's a great question. So again, what we're doing here is that we're connecting transferable utility problems, which are typically linear integer programming problems, to problems that are ones of random equilibria, which are fixed point problems. And so again, the proof of the result I showed you is a fixed point argument to be able to do that. And so once again, the answer to whether I learn anything about computation of random equilibria or feasibility is unfortunately no, because you have to pass this argument through a fixed point argument, and you lose kind of computational properties as a result. So I think we can actually be quite precise for some of these problems. There are results that say, for example, computing kind of an equilibrium in the pseudo market setting is a PPAD complete problem. In the corresponding transferable utility case, it would be a linear program, basically. So something you can do in polynomial time. So again, this is just about existence. So let me just kind of show a connection between two results that maybe people didn't really see the connection with before, but this paper sort of establishes formally. One is one that I've showed you already, the assignment game, which we know and love. Just to remind you, heterogeneous items, unit demand, each agent just wants one house, quasi-linear utility. As I said in the previous part, Koopmans and Beckman showed that competitive equilibria exist. A beautiful, simple linear programming duality argument that many of you have done as undergraduates, I suspect. There is another paper much later on that seems to deal with a very similar problem, in which there are heterogeneous positions, as they're called, but you just call them items. There's unit demand, but there is no quasi-linear utility because it's a pseudo market, so you cannot use money. And for this famous setting, Helen and Zach has showed that pseudo market equilibria exists. That is, every random equilibrium can be realized as a lottery over allocations. But the proof is very different. So if you look in the proof, the first thing you do is you use Kakutani's fixed point theorem to establish that there exists a random equilibrium. And at the last step, because it's essentially an assignment problem, you conclude immediately that this feasibility or realizability step is trivial because it's simply a consequence of a Birkhoff and Neumann theorem. Why? Because any allocation is a doubly stochastic matrix, and you can write these as a convex combination of integer matrices, permutation matrices, which are exactly deterministic allocations. So for Hillen and Zeckhauser, the last step was easy. The realizability, it was immediate from this. But actually, once you go beyond the unit demand case, things seem to have got much hairier. So let me just sort of say the following. One of the things that the duality result I just showed you points out is that from an existence point of view, these two problems are equivalent. Pseudo-market equilibrium existence in the Hillen and Zeckhauser pseudo-market and the competitive equilibrium existence in the TU economy in this assignment game, they're equivalent problems. So one exists if and only if the other exists. But it actually also allows you to connect papers, which I think people have thought of as seemingly completely unconnected. So in the case when valuations are additive but multi-unit, Budish, Chaker, Jima, Milgram had a very famous paper. One of the results in it was pointing out that, in fact, you still get realizability of random equilibria in the pseudo market. But what our result shows is that this result is a consequence of there being a competitive equilibrium in a transferable utility economy with additive preferences, which is a result due to Crawford and Knoer from 40 years ago. Ravi already mentioned the case of substitutes. You already know that under substitutes, an equilibrium exists. That was shown by Kelso and Crawford, same Crawford. And there were two papers in just the last couple of years, some of which I think is yet to come out, which showed separately, independently, that under substitutes, there exists a pseudo-market equilibrium. Again, what our result points out is that the reason why it happens in the pseudo-market is a consequence of there being an equilibrium in the TU economy. Again, all of these ones I've shown you are invariant domains. Unit demand, additive, and substitutes, they're all invariant domains. But of course, you can also do more, and there are many other papers that people have written. All of these papers have invariant domains. All of them establish separately existence of equilibrium in different transferable utility economies. Ravi mentioned some of the others. As you can see, I was running out of space, so I picked these three. Our result immediately implies that a pseudo-market equilibrium will exist for the same types of valuations, for the same domains in the pseudo-market. And all of these would indeed be new. I think an especially exciting thing, as Ravi pointed out, is that in transferable utility economies, equilibrium can exist even if all agents view goods as complements. Now, there's got to be restrictions. The restriction you saw today is bundle consistency. So you do need to check it. You can't just allow for any complements. But there are many types of complements that you can allow for under bundle consistency. And this immediately implies that if you take those bundle consistent preferences, even if all of them have complements, you will get realizability of random equilibria. And so that's the sort of the kind of the novel insight. It also turns out that you can extend these arguments to include priorities, to include various types of individual aggregate constraints. You can do this in settings where pricing is nonlinear, et cetera, et cetera. The crucial result is the one that I showed you. Everything else can be done sort of as an extension. I've got 1 minute to spare, so I'm going to leave it for questions, but I'm very grateful for your patience and nodding in just the right moments for those of you who are on camera. And thank you so much. And I think both Ravi and I are very grateful for this opportunity. Thanks so much.
Can you say anything about how you show the equivalence, about the proof of the equivalence?
So yeah, so for this part rather than for the previous part?
Yes.
So for this part, it's really a sequence. The difficult direction is actually a sequence of linear programming arguments. So you start with the fixed point argument, which is straightforward. And then it's actually a sequence of the entire proof is linear programming, which is sort of, I think, sort of nice on its own. There isn't any unusual machinery. And it turns out that this invariance condition, which Ravi had pointed out, this version of the invariance condition plays kind of a crucial role in doing a lot of the work. In particular, one of the things that you could do, so I'm going to give you kind of an intuition of one step maybe. You start out in a case where you have a random equilibrium and agents are budget constrained. What invariance allows you to do is to scale the valuations in a way as to relax the budget constraints. And suddenly you find yourself in an economy where there are no budget constraints. Well, that's already quite nice. And then you can sort of use kind of more work. But that's the kind of thing that invariance buys you, is this ability to do certain things that, you know, turn out to helpfully move you from one type of economy to another. I was sure I wouldn't have enough time to cover it, which is why I have no slides about it. And it turned out that that expectation was rational.
Okay, any more questions? So let's thank our speakers for this wonderful tutorial. It was really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alon, and thank you, Laura, for organizing. Thanks,
And,
everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for showing up.
Thanks so much. And I'm sorry to miss EC, but I hope that those of you who go, you have an amazing time. And I'll be thinking of all of you in Budapest.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you so much, guys. Thanks, Daniel.